Okay, let's go then. The topic will be on turn barreling versus fish and trying to identify spots that, trying to identify right from the flop spots where will be very profitable to turn barrel. So I selected a few spots here on skier. Wait a second, you're not watching my screen yet. Okay, you are watching my screen now, right? Okay, nice. So as I was saying, I selected some spots for you to be more aware of how fold equity will work out on the turn, which is a super important street to play against fish, because on the one hand we need to know exactly the hands that we are filtering with our bets on the turn to be able to decide whether or not we should be bluffing on the river, and being aware of frequencies and so on will help you a lot to make these kind of decisions on whether to bluff river or not, or just understanding an overall plan of how you approach the turn will give you a lot of insights on the river and on the flop as well, because sometimes you can plan a turn barrel just from how the flop is built. And these are several examples. It's 5 examples where we want to think about the hand right after we see the flop. We kind of know that we are interested in second barreling. Most of the spots will be in limped pot, and the thing that these spots have in common are the amount of gut shots that are available on the flop. So let's start. This is a limped pot with 16 big blinds, and it's pretty much the best spot to double barrel on blanks against fish, because if we take a look at how a fish will be reacting to our flop bet, we can see that his floats will be his calls will be extremely wide, and then we will be able to attack that on the turn. And in spots like this where the range is very inelastic, I would say, I mean that whether we bet 100 or 150, a fish will call the same amount pretty much. So here we want to go a little bit bigger and bet 150 against the fish if we are planning to double barrel on the turn, because we get that extra chips and extra value from our flop bet. So this is what he should be calling against the 100 bet on the flop. And these hands, I think even fish are not calling most of the times, like Jack 8 or Jack 9 or Queen 9. Maybe Queen 9 sometimes they are calling, but these hands not super often. And I think that most of what they call is hands like this that they should be folding. 8-4, 7-4, 9-4, 10-4, Jack 4 always. They basically call any gut shot, as I was saying. So this session will be focused on raising awareness of how many gut shots a fish can be calling in certain boards, and then how to exploit it on the turn. So all these hands that should be folding are calling. That makes the range wider on the flop, and on certain turns like 7, 8, 9, Jack, Queen, King. The King is not so good, but still it's pretty good. So these hands will always be a fold on the turn. So that's what we plan to do. Then some more hands that he should be folding. Same here, 8-5 offsuit, so 8-5 without any backdoor flush, he should be folding. Same with the 5x gutshots here and the 4x gutshots. So instead of betting 100, we prefer to be betting 150, because he's calling basically the same hands, I would say. Fish are never folding a gutshot on the flop. It doesn't matter if you bet 1 big blind or 1.5. So he goes for a call, but I mean, since here the software is betting 100 wider, then just to be more theoretically correct, we will choose this sizing, but then in game you pick the other size. And let's take a look at a couple of turns. Let's take a look at a not so good turn here, but it's still not so bad because he's still folding threes and deuces when we bet. Let's say we bet half pot, which very often will be enough to make him fold of what we wanted to. We only have solution for 6.5 and 7 big blinds here. That sucks. Anyway, so I will tell you what I do here personally, and then you can take it from there because we don't have a solution on the browser. On the 5x, I would be barreling small, just half pot, because I think most people are folding deuces and threes, and then some random floats like king 10 or queen jack, queen 10, things like that. They are usually folding and not going crazy, so I would be betting on the turn. And the reason why I prefer to bet on the turn and not make a river delayed c-bet on a bet check bet sequence, it is because sometimes fish feel uncomfortable with bottom pair or 3 or even a 5 because they see a straight on the board and they don't want to check call. So sometimes they go for a random bet and you don't have the opportunity to bluff them. You could raise, but he also has straights in his range, so raising won't be very profitable on the river when he bets. And again, bet check betting won't be very profitable either because he will be bluffing some hands and he won't allow you to bluff yourself a lot of the time. So I prefer to go for a half pot on the turn, and that's it. But for a 7x turn, things change a lot. I guess we do have a solution here. Yeah. So out of position is checking his entire range, which usually happens. And if he donk bets, by the way, on this 7, it's super often a range pure of trash because, as we said, we have so many. He has so many gut shots that he shouldn't have, such as 8-5, 8-4, 9-4, 9-5, that when he donk bets, his range is super weak because he usually isn't donk betting a deuce. He usually isn't donk betting a 3. So then what he donk bets is just draws, and we can raise with pretty much any hand. So we continue the plan on barreling the turn regardless of if he donks or not. But they usually don't donk here, so that's okay. Okay, so then even GTO goes super wide as a bluff, as you can see here from our side. The only hands that he doesn't bluff are the ones that have somehow showdown value. But all the other trash is basically a bluff. Even 5 deuce, you start to turn it into a bluff. 4 deuce as well. And I don't know about 6 deuce, whether it is a bluff or I guess it is a bluff. Or a value bet. Yeah, since you bet pot, I guess you are bluffing this hand because not really anything worse calls you. And as you can see, even GTO goes super wide on turn barreling here. We are only checking 30%, and that's against a well-balanced range that has some straights that they didn't check raise on the flop, that has some 2-pair maybe slow played, and that floats correctly on the flop. That they aren't floating 9-5 or 9-4, 8-4, 8-5 or 8-4. So if we put the fish range on the flop with all these extra floats, which are a ton of combos, by the way, because offsuit hands are 12 combos and it's a lot. It's maybe like a 4%. Well, maybe I'm totally wrong, but I would estimate it's like 4% extra that the fish is floating and then folding on the turn in comparison to GTO. Only about these hands. I mean, these hands that he shouldn't be floating are like maybe a 4% extra that he's folding. So instead of checking 30%, if you put a solver to play against the fish and you give him the proper range and so on, maybe this goes down to like 15%. I don't know. And then the same, you can see the same in a lot of other turns. So let's take a look at Nate, for example. It's basically the same. It's 30% check. It went up from 28 to 30%. And regarding sizing, personally, I think that on an 8th turn, you should go for a triple barrel and betting smallish on the turn, on this specific flop, because you allow your opponent to call some threes and maybe some hands like Queen 4 or King 4, King 5, King 4. If you bet half pot, you allow him to call all those hands. And he's calling out of odds. And also, not only out of odds, he doesn't even know what is coming on the river. And on the river, an overbet is coming for sure, like a 125% pot, I would say, because with that bet, you are like almost 100% sure that the fish is folding a 3 or a deuce or king high or something like that. Otherwise, if you bet smallish on the river, sometimes they can find the call with a 3. It depends also on the fish, how you want to play the hand, because as regulars do, fish also have their own metagame and thinking process and so on. So there are fish with a more advanced knowledge of the game, and there are fish with a less advanced knowledge of the game. And it is on you to identify those fish and choose a strategy accordingly. So if I was facing let's say if I was facing a fish that isn't at all aware of how he's capped in this board and how frequencies work and so on, if I am facing that kind of fish, I don't really need to go for a huge size on the river, like 125%. I would just go for 80-90% as a bluff, I would say, because it's enough to make him fold the 3. In his head, he has a bottom pair, and the bottom pair is really bad. So fish don't call with really bad hands on the river. That's all they are thinking. But another more advanced fish can think that he doesn't have many aces, and therefore he should be calling with the top of his range. Maybe he watched some Daft Punk videos, and after watching that, he thinks that he should always call a 3, and if you don't make a really big bet, then he will be calling. So you want to identify these players as based on the HUD mostly. For example, based on the pre-flop VPIP that they have heads up, if the VPIP is under 65%, then you can expect that his thought process is not too advanced, because he isn't even playing correctly pre-flop. So you can take from that he won't be very good post-flop and that he will play like a complete fish, I would say, or maybe under 60% VPIP on the pre-flop. And then if he's playing kind of aggressive, maybe raising some hands, having a normal c-bet, having some check raises and so on, then it can look like he knows a little bit what he's doing. And therefore, in those cases, I would go for a bigger size on the river. Or depending, I'm not sure, I go a little bit by feeling sometimes. And against those players who are good, sometimes I just prefer to overbet the turn. So you make it here like instead of pot, you make it 150%, and he folds basically everything. He can fold like 90% of his range if you bet 150% here, because what hands can you find from him that call as a semi-fish or as a fish? They are always scared to see big bets, so something like a 3 or a deuce, something like a 3 or a deuce will always be folding, and something like a gut shot will always be folding as well. Don't you think that fish calling range on the river is pretty static on ace-x board if our bet is higher than 75%? Yes. Generally yes, and that's why I was making the distinction about the different type of fish. Against the fish who are not very knowledgeable about the game, I would go for a sizing between 75 and 90%, and then against fish who are more knowledgeable about the game, whose range can be not as static as you think if you go with 75% versus going for 125%, then I might just choose 125%, because you are so sure that with this sizing he folds every 3 that I think it's worth to pay the price for it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I do. So I think it's very hard to solve that spot in a theoretical way and explain it to you properly, why I think that versus certain fish it's better to go for 125%. But I think it's sometimes the case against some fish, like let's say against 20% of fish, it's more profitable to go for 125, and against the rest of the fish, it's more profitable to go between 75 and 90%, I would say. But this hand is most importantly on the turn, as we were discussing. So just be aware that his floating range on the flop is not as well constructed as it should, because he shouldn't be calling so many gut shots. And then by knowing that, we can adapt our entire strategy. And then if we also know how he constructs his calling range on the turn versus certain sizes, then we can also build a super profitable river strategy. But that's too far and too complicated for an hour to cover everything. So let's move with the next board. Also take into account that most of these boards, at least for the moment, are in a limped pot. So if you go on a single raised pot, then it's a little bit different, because you have to take into account that all these gut shots that are present in a limped pot, when you raise, they fold them pre-flop. So they don't have hands like 8-4 offsuit, 9-4, 9-5, 10-4 generally. Sometimes they do, but not generally. And then since they don't have these hands, these concepts don't apply as well as here. And then it happens in some other boards, so just use your logic and try to spot these kind of boards in single raise pots and in limped pots, but act accordingly to their pre-flop range. Okay, so let's move to the next example. This one is a little different. Well, very different, I would say. Our flop betting range should be just 55% with 16 big blinds. I guess with 25, it's the same actually. Surprisingly, I thought it would be a bit less when we were deeper because of the straight being there. But anyways, this is a board that people might under civet versus fish, because it is true that you don't have too much fold equity on the flop. And if you have a hand like 5-3, for example, a lot of people prefer to check. Actually, GTO checks, so it makes sense for you to be checking as well. But I personally think that since it is a good spot to set up a double barrel as well, then I am betting most of the hands that GTO says that you should check. So for example, a hand like 5-3, I would always be betting here generally. 5-4 as well. Like, I would be betting a ton of hands, except these hands I wouldn't be betting because we are focusing on finding profitable turn barrels, and then these hands which don't have many streets of value, then I would just be checking on the flop. 10 deuce, 10 3, 10 4, 10 5 maybe I could bet because we have a backdoor straight, but I would mostly be checking. 10 8 I would be betting as well. Some more bluffs maybe that I would be betting. Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate to how I would be playing. Also, you have to take into account, of course, your opponent's aggression. If he's very aggressive, then a lot of these bluffs become not very profitable to bet on the flop. But generally, it's a good bluffing strategy, what you see here. Betting an over to the 10, and these hands we can double barrel very often. And then these hands which we don't have any over, then GTO prefers to check. Since here we have a gut shot, and here we have a bad open-ended, I would be betting these hands as well. And then that's it. I think that would be the only difference. And I am betting more often than GTO in this spot because of how his turn range will look like. So first of all, on the flop, he should be folding like 40% when we bet one big blind. Let's analyze quickly if this is true. As you can see, hands like King 4 and King 5, even if he has a backdoor, usually are not called in this spot. Same for hands like Ace Deuce, Ace 3, Ace 4, I would say. Most of the times they don't call on this wet board. And then, on the other hand, these hands, they are always calling again. It happens the same here as it happened in the Ace-X type board, that they are calling these hands 9 deuce, 9 3, 9 4, 9 5, 8 deuce, 8 3 because they are gut shots, and then they shouldn't be calling them. So these extra hands here give us extra fold equity on the turn again because it is on their range. So if the turn is a blank, like whatever that is not an 8 or a 9, then we should be very happy about bluffing it. Also, I lost my train of thought, but as I was saying, here the flop bet is already profitable by default because we put one big blind to win 3, and he's folding a little bit more of these hands, but he's calling then this hand. So our flop bet is already a little bit plus EV. He will be folding here maybe like 36% of the time, more or less. So we can bet any 2 on the flop if you really wanted to, but we won't be doing that because super trashy hands will make a better EV as a check and delayed c-bet or something like that. Damn, I always call these hands too. Well, it's okay to call them if you have good reasons to do so. If your opponent doesn't have much of a turn barrel, which is very often the case in the lower stakes, then you can call. If your opponent has way too much limp c-bet, then you can check raise these hands. As you can see, sometimes you check raise 9-4 here. Sometimes you check raise 9 deuce, even 8 deuce you check raise, and sometimes you check raise 9-5 as well. So, and I guess the EV of doing anything with this hand is super close. So the EV of folding is -100, the EV of calling is -100.7, the EV of raising is -100 again, and just if you play don't raise all in, obviously. And yeah, you can adapt to your opponent and play these hands based on your opponent tendencies. I would say it's the best way to go. It's not a compulsory raise or a compulsory call or a compulsory fold. Just adapt to your opponent with the hands that are super close between a fold and a call. The thing is that if you are not careful and you don't watch out for your frequencies, so let's say that you play like fish and you are calling all these hands, then a guy who is more experienced than you will know that you are letting your turn range be way too weak. Instead, if you raised these hands, you wouldn't have a weak turn range, because these hands are on the raising part of your range, and your turn calling range, I mean your flop calling range, is much stronger if you raise these hands. So, but if you call them always, then it becomes weaker, and that's what we can exploit here. So let's go for a call from out of position. And then the turn will be a queen to start with. And our turn's sibling frequency is like 60%. Here you can see that we continue betting pure air type hands like a jack. Well, we have an over to the 10, which is important, so that's also a reason why we bet. Then we continue to bet bad king highs, such as these ones, and we bet a lot of our gut shots. But again, here, since we can expect like maybe 4% extra fold equity from our opponent, and also let me have a look at the check raising range, because we didn't talk about that just quickly. Yeah, I think fish are mostly check raising these hands. 10-9 maybe sometimes they aren't, but they are always check raising 7-6, always check raising 9-8 for sure. And those hands that GTO puts into the calling range, the fish are always check raising. So this and this is always a check raise. This instead is just a call for fish, so you have extra fold equity from this hand on the turn. Then this is also a call, but whatever. Then this is also a call, so you have extra fold equity on the turn again. Same for this, same for this, same for this, same for this, same for this. He's calling instead of check raising this hand, so as we said, his range becomes weaker if he only calls this type of hands. So yeah, overall, his range on the turn will be folding all these hands plus all these that he should be folding. So let's go to the queen again. And here, when you see that Jack 4 is like a borderline barrel, so checking is minus 173 chips, betting is minus 173 as well. It's super close. Then when you add like 5% points of extra fold equity, then it becomes way more profitable to bet than to check. Also keep in mind we have a jack of spades, so that's a little bit important. But even if we don't have a jack of spades, we can barrel comfortably here. It's always better to have a spade because you block some of his calling flush draw hands, but if you don't have it, it's okay as well because he's folding so much by calling all those gut shots that he doesn't have to call on the flop. So here personally I would be barreling the king highs. I would be barreling if I have a spade. If I don't have a spade, it will depend on the type of fish, but you can barrel these hands as well. And then for the ace high, I would probably be checking it on the flop. So But it's maybe a mistake. I don't know. If we assume that he will fold in so much on the turn, maybe it's a mistake to just check behind on the flop, these kind of hands. Because you are really not winning at showdown very often on most runouts with this. So you can actually bet it. And then the king high is lower than a 6. I would be betting mostly on the flop to continue with our plan of turn barreling. And then these hands you can barrel as well. You should barrel all of your gut shots to the 9 especially, and then all of your gut shots to the 8 actually as well. Because it's when it is close EV between checking or betting, then if you know that your opponent is overfolding like 5%, then it becomes way better to bet. More hands that I would be betting as a bluff. Any kind of draw, pretty much, I would be betting. Overs to the 10, I would be betting as well. Gut shots here. I would be betting also 5-4, 5-3 offsuit. 5 deuce random bluff here. So you can, just by this bluff, you know how hard can you go. I mean, how hard you can go on turn barreling. If GTO is betting 5 deuce here, it's like you have a lot of fold equity already for you to be profitable with this hand. And that's it, I guess. Let's move on to the next board. We should have a look at what he's calling, obviously. Yeah, I almost forgot. So we bet 250, which is I think it's the best size. What GTO picks here, it's the best size to generate our fold equity in what we are interested. Maybe if the turn is a deuce, we are interested in going for a mini overbet or pot. Maybe you can go for 110 so that you can make sure you are folding sixes, and you could also go for 150%, and then you can also make him fold some sevens. Fish really are super afraid of overbets. When they see an overbet, they fold like crazy. They can be folding a 7 here if the turn is a deuce, especially if it's a completely blank, like a deuce of clubs, and they don't see many draws, then they can be folding a 7 if you overbet. But it's up to you, to be honest, to pick a sizing. GTO sizing 250 is pretty good already because you accomplish the folds from the gut shots. Pot is good as well, but I think not sure if it is as good. I think for fish it's maybe better to go a little bit bigger, like 110%, because you make sure that on a queen turn he's folding a 7 as well. With pot bet, sometimes he's calling 7, I think. But if you make it 110%, then he will be folding hands like Jack 7 and 7-3, 7-4, 7-5. So let's see how he should react to this first sizing. I think it's nothing too crazy. This is crazy, but that's all I would say. And this as well is quite crazy. But I guess here we have no, with these ones we don't even have a draw and we are check raising. So that's pretty crazy. But apart from those hands that are very aggressive check raises, then I don't think there are other hands that would be very weird here. So GTO actually responds to a bet the same way a fish would respond, except this type of hands, I would say. and it's a 40% fold, by the way, on GTO. Then if you add all these hands on the flop, fish call 6x here, I feel they don't. Even if you bet 250, they aren't calling the 6, but 6 plus gutshot, they are definitely calling. No, but this is 2 pair, this is 6 plus gutshot, 6 plus gutshot. This is 2 pair, this is king 6, which they are probably folding this one actually. But pair plus gutshot, fish never fold. So jack 6, since it's like just a 6, they are folding, and then these 6s are with flush draw. So they are calling these ones as well, obviously. And yeah, the only 6 that they are not calling here that GTO is calling would be king 6 and some combos of jack 6 here. Because these 6s, they are folding for sure. The 6-5, 6-4, 6-3, 6 deuce. And let's see a pot bet. So against the pot bet, they are starting to fold some 7s for sure. Jack 7, they are folding mostly always. I think that's maybe the reason to go for 110%, because you make sure that hands like Jack 7 fold, King 7 folds as well. And then maybe even some hand like 9-7 actually it starts folding. And then maybe a hand like 8-6 offsuit, if they see that they have a very weak gutshot, then they might fold if they face a big bet. But they are never folding a 10. And here GTO starts to fold some of the worst 10s sometimes. Yeah, and that's all about this board, I would say. Then we could talk about rivers, but maybe for another lesson. Now let's go to 10-9-6. This one is different because the 9 is like a considerable overcard to the 7, and now when they float gutshots here, like Queen 8, they are floating with an overcard to the 7 as well. Now if they float here with a gutshot, they are not floating with an overcard. And I think that will make a difference for the whole game tree of GTO. And this is 16 big blinds. Okay, so apparently no difference at all. We are still limp sievering 57%, and I think here it was exactly the same. I mean the opposite. We are checking 57%, and here we are checking 1% more basically. Although here, I guess, yeah, this makes sense. Since our middle pairs need less protection, then we are betting 100 more often than 150. Oh, and also I didn't mention this in this board, but use the same principle as in this first hand. Here we said that the flop bet is called anyways, whether it is 100 or 150. So here try to take advantage of the same concept and bet just a tiny bit bigger on the flop. There's no need to bet 150 either. If you are playing not many tables and you think that a fish might fold the gutshot to a 150 size, then you can go for 130. Just make sure he isn't folding a gutshot and that you are taking the maximum value on the flop. Let me just make sure if I'm recording or not, because maybe I am not. We are good to go. I finished saying that, yeah, you want to just take the maximum value on the flop without making them fold. Gut shot. So if you feel like you are going too big, just size smaller. That's it. So let's take a look at the flop bet. It should look something like this. It's very similar to the previous board, as you see, but we don't bet hands like king 5, king 4, king 3, because we don't have a backdoor straight. In the other board, we had a backdoor to the 5 and the 4, and I think that's why mostly. And then the queen is just too bad to check behind, and we start betting these hands that have an overcard to the 10 again. And not many pure bluffs. Some 5-4, this is surprising. But anyways, let's talk about how the turn will go in order to change our c-betting strategy again. So let's assume we c-bet 100, and this is what our opponent should be calling. He should be calling half of the 8s, no 7, and again they are calling all 7s here and all 8s as well. What else are they calling that they shouldn't? Maybe, yeah, hands like this as well, these 7s which are suited and have a backdoor. Sometimes they should be folding. Oh, not with a backdoor, but without a backdoor they should be folding. And then I think that's it. Yeah, Jack 3 with a backdoor flush, they are always folding. And then the kings with a backdoor, they are always folding. Usually, I mean, like 80% or 90%. And then ace-x with a backdoor, they are also usually folding in wet boards, I would say. Also, again, keep in mind that all these check raises, like king 7, queen 7, hands like king 7 here again, and jack 7, they are usually played as a call, so the range is again weaker on the turn than GTO. And also, he should be check raising only half of the straight combos, and he's check raising all of them for sure. Same for 9-6. He should be check raising only half of them, and he's check raising every time. So the turn range is a little bit weaker than GTO, I would say. Then he also should be check raising 10s, which he isn't. So that is bad for us, obviously, because his range is a little bit stronger if he includes some top pairs into his check calling range. But overall, I would say his range is a little bit weaker than GTO on the turn, for sure, because he's in check raising most of this stuff, and he's check raising most of his strong hands. Let's go for a ace turn, let's say. So here, let's see what he should be doing against the pot bet size. So first of all, he doesn't have these hands, because we said he was folding pre-flop mostly. Then hands like this, well, the double gutshot might not be folding. The double gutshot might be fine. But against a pot bet, it doesn't seem like a really good turn bet because he's playing close to what we see here, I would say. Maybe he's even calling losers, such as he's calling a 9 maybe sometimes. So against, if we make a pot bet here, it's not super profitable, it seems. And he can also call some Jack-8 type of hands. So here, if we want to target and continue our plan of targeting gut shots, then since it is a board where he is not folding too much against big sizes, I think I would prefer to go for a smaller size and target some of his sixes and some of his gut shots that he shouldn't have floated on the flop. So if we go for a 250 bet, this is how he should be playing. Here he's folding like 37%, but again, since we assume that he's playing some more hands that he should on the flop, this folding range can go up to like 41% or something like that. Maybe even more because he doesn't have these hands again. And we said that this hand was a check raise on the flop. So yeah, this can go up to like 41, 42%. So you can barrel with a wide range. It's the same concept as other boards, but in this one it doesn't apply as perfectly because of some combos of Queen 8, Jack 8, which are open enders, well, or double gut shots that your opponent is not folding. So just having these two combos gives you like 2% less fold equity, and that is a little bit significant. So on this board, it's not the best thing to go for a double barrel. It is still profitable, but you have to be a little bit more careful and select your opponents a little bit better, I guess. But anyways, I'm curious to see the pure bluffs that GTO chooses here. Yeah, so we are choosing Jack 5 again, Jack deuce, Queen deuce, Queen 3, Queen 4, Queen 5. And the EV of checking again, it's like almost always like that in GTO. When you see a mixed frequency, it's usually the same EV betting or checking. So since again his turn range is weaker than GTO, we can bet over cards to the 10 because we have enough equity. And yeah, that's it. But it's not so profitable as in other hands that we saw. It is still profitable and you can do it, but just be a little bit more aware that it's not printing money like crazy. It's just a little bit better to bet than to check. So maybe if for example you have 1,000 chips and your opponent has only 500 and you double him, and you cover him 2x, then you can make aggressive moves and risk some chips, because you can still, even if you lose let's say a 300 chip spot, then you can always get like, I don't know, dealt aces and the other guy gets dealt 10 jack offsuit, he opens, you 3-bet and you stack him off. So you are stacking him from 700 chips. But instead, if you have like 500 chips and he has 1,000, then you can go down to 250 chips and you don't get as much value from your strong hands because you are shorter. So the deeper you are, the better it is for you, because fish will be making more mistakes and you will get more value from them by playing all hands. When you have hands with very good equity on this kind of connected boards, let's say Queen Jack, do you delay or c-bet plus barrel? That's a really good question. and it depends on the stack size. If I am 25 big blinds deep, then I would always be going with my plan here, which is double barrel. If I am playing 8 blinds, I am bet calling because our hand is super strong. I mean, bet calling on the flop, and if he decides to just call the flop, then we will be barreling all in on the turn. And then if we have 12 big blinds, that's when it starts to become tricky because you don't really want to bet fold against the 10. I mean, you can't bet fold, but you put yourself in a high variance spot by betting on the flop. So depending on the opponent, I would choose whether I want to c-bet or check in this range of blinds. Like let's say 11 to 14 blinds, it's like quite close, because these hands don't work well as a double barrel, as you know, because you get shoved on the turn and you have to call, and it's a shit. So on this range of stacks, like 11 to 14 big blinds, where, well, even 16 big blinds, it's not very good to play these hands as a c-bet and barrel on the turn because of how much equity you have and how uncomfortable it would be if you face a shove. So yeah, I like putting these hands into my checking range and delay plus barrel. I think I would be doing that against most fish, and then against super passive fish, I might just bet. Okay, let's move on to the next board. This is a limpet pot again, ace, king, jack. Let's say it's 16 big blinds. We bet 100. And out of position is calling this range. Oh, this is super surprising, actually. I had no idea you had to float with 8-6 of hearts half of the time, or 9-6, or even 9-7 makes little more sense, but I would be folding most of the times. So I think this is quite an accurate range of what your opponent will be doing in most cases. Even if they are fish, it's just natural for them to play this range. So this is a very good range estimation of how everyone is playing this spot, more or less. Maybe some random races with 10 deuce from time to time. So it's a really good representation of a real in-game range versus range, I would say. I also noticed that we have some bigger bet sizing as well because of how many gut shots can call. And actually here we can explore, if we bet a little bit bigger, how many gut shots he should be calling. And you can see he starts to fold some tens and he starts to fold some of the bad queens. So if you find a fish that is still calling this type of hands, even if you bet 150, and you can still make his range wide to barrel on the turn, then go for this sizing. If you think that the fish is very tight, then just go for the smaller sizing and let him call the gut shots anyways. So let's see how our opponent should react on the turn on certain boards. So this is button range. It's a 40% bet, and we start to have some overbetting range. So let's look at the 3 bet sizings and what we think that our opponent will be making most mistakes against. So the 250 bet size is the first one. This is how the opponent should react. He should be calling some queens, most of the people are not calling. It's like 10% of the Queen X should be a call here, as GTO says. And then that's about it. Then some Queen 8. I mean, he's overfolding a little bit, as we can see, because he's not calling so many queens. And then also you have to take into account that generally when we are 16 big blinds deep, fish don't have these aces into their range, so they are folding this as well. Then the same goes for ace-3 and ace-4 offsuit. They never have this, or almost never have this type of hand, so they are folding a little bit more than GTO, but not too much. Maybe they are folding here 40%, and in real game they are folding like 41 or 42%. So it's still better to barrel usually than to check. But let's see if other bet sizes are making us more money. So against the 400 pot size bet, he starts to fold some jacks, but not every time, still calling sometimes. So I think that in this spot, it depends on the type of fish. If he's a calling station or not, he will be folding or calling some jacks. And all the rest of the range, I think it's quite accurate. A good representation of how a fish would be reacting to a pot size bet on the turn. More or less. He will be folding a bit more jacks than here, I think. Maybe he's folding always jack 4, almost always jack 5, I don't know, something like that. So this is a good bet size to use, but still it doesn't feel like such a safe option to go for, where you can exploit your opponent so much. And for the overbet, let's see how it goes. For the overbet, he still has to call some jacks, which he isn't for sure. He might be folding something like jack 10, really. And he will sometimes be folding something like queen 3 as well. And 10-3 he's folding quite for sure. And then he can also fold some draws. So let's say queen deuce of spades, sometimes they get super scared and they fold the draw against the 150% size, and then they might fold some 10x with a draw as well, like 10-5, sometimes they could fold. But I think that looking at the three sizes, there is not a super significant difference as to how a fish will be overfolding here against the size. I think against the size that they mostly overfold, it is against the overbet, because they should be calling like 35% of jack 9. They are folding always. Same for jack 8, same for jack 7, same for jack. Any jack is folding against an overbet. But still, I think that we can make ourselves a discount, because going for 135%, or I mean, going somewhere between 125% and 135% will accomplish almost exactly the same as a 150% overbet. So here I feel like the best sizing to use exploitatively against fish and also against a lot of regs is just to go for something between 125 and 135%. Is queen 3 off only folding when he has a spade? Should make sense. No, it's completely mixed. But when he has a spade, he folds a little bit more, yeah, it seems. Because, yeah, he is blocking some of your queen X bluffs with a spade. I mean, your bluffs with a queen of spades. As you can see, queen 3 with a spade here is folded 28%, and queen 3 with a heart is folded only 15%. And then, not sure why it picks to fold more diamonds. I mean, this specific combo, but whatever. I think it's not too relevant to go over it. the most relevant thing is to know against which size jacks start to fold, and we can play exploitatively. So yeah, I think that's all about this board. Let's move to the next one. Ace 10 jack. Oh, and a nice difference that I'd like you to notice on these boards is that here it is mostly recommended to bet 100 only, because your hands or your range overall doesn't need protection. And then on this board, it is recommended to bet way bigger, like at least 50% or pot. And you can see you are not betting 100 too much in GTO terms. It's not super relevant, because if our plan is to keep his range wide and barrel on the turn, then we don't want to use such big sizes. It depends on the fish, of course. If you think that he is calling half pot the same as he is calling this size, then you should use half pot, of course. And I think this is a good example where fish feel like they have not only a gut shot, but also an overcard to the jack and the 10. I mean, if they have queen deuce, for example. So they are willing to call a bit bigger sizes. Here they are not willing to call bigger sizes if they have a 10, for example, because it feels like such a weak draw. But then here, either if they have a queen or if they have a king, they will be both calling as medium size. So you can go for something like 175 chips here, more or less. Oh yeah, it's min raise pot, but fuck. Whatever. What I was saying in theory terms, it still applies in limpet pots. But yeah, it's you are definitely right. I don't know. You can have a look at the limit pot later by yourself, because I want to go over two single raised pots just to illustrate the difference on each of them. But as I was explaining, this board is so similar to this one that I don't think it needs too much explanation. The only difference is that the flop range will be wider when they call us. I mean, sorry, forget that. The flop range can afford to call us a bigger size. So that would be the main difference, I would say. Because on the turn, they will be reacting very, very similarly to here. And I think that on turns that don't complete anything, our size should be the same here and here. So something like 125 or 135 makes a lot of sense. But I wanted to illustrate the single raise spots, because on some of these spots, you should be a bit more careful than on others. This is a spot where you should be more careful when you go for a turn overbet or a big size, and this is a spot where you don't really need to be careful. Actually, can someone tell me why here you don't need to be very careful with your sizing on the turn, because most of your sizings will be profitable, and why here, which seems quite a similar board, you need to be careful when choosing a turn size? I'll give you like 3 minutes to think about it. Martin says that because on ace jack 10 he will have more king x and queen x to float, and this range will fold easily on turn. But here he has jacks and tens as well, right? So I mean, there are similar amount of jacks and tens in the deck than kings and queens, so it's not 100% correct, your statement. Yeah, this is min raise spot. Yeah, both of these examples we will treat it as min raise spots. I mean, your first train of thought was correct, Martins, but it's missing something. Maybe you already know it, but you didn't type it because it seemed obvious. I don't know. Okay, so let's continue from what Martin said. Oh, he wants to finish writing something, it seems. Yeah, exactly. It's because of that. So Martin says the first thing he said is because on ace jack 10 he will have more king x, queen x to float, and this range will fold easily on the turn. And it's of course a good starting point, but it is missing the other part that he just said, which is that pre-flop we are not defending hands like 10 deuce or jack deuce, but instead we have king deuce and queen deuce much more often. So as Yuri said, on ace king queen he has more ready hands, made hands, I guess he meant. So he hits ace king queen more often as a pair than ace jack 10. So the turn situation, we don't have as much fold equity on ace king queen, and also as Martin said, they are not floating as wide on the flop on ace king queen because they are not defending pre-flop hands like jack deuce, so they don't have that into the flop range. So let's see here how we should play and how we should play on the other board. Let's say we go for a third or 40% pot size bet. So as you see, he should already start to fold some queens because our range when we raise is very, very strong, and he's never folding some queens. So let's assume he calls, and the turn is 3. And also, just to make it clear that overall, on all these spots that we saw, we are not going super, super crazy with flop bets. I mean, we are generally not taking a 0-0-0 equity hand and just putting it into our Sibering range because he will be folding a lot on the turn. Almost every bet that we have made on the flop with trashy hands has enough fold equity to make it at least break even or profitable. So on the turn he checks and we have the opportunity to bet again, and we can pick a couple of sizes. I think that here against the pot size bet or 135% pot size bet, they will be making the most mistakes. It depends on the fees also, because as we talked in the first board, sometimes we want to set up the pot for an effective river barrel. So we want to base our turn strategy on our river objective. So here, depending on the fees and how much he will be folding on the river, sometimes it is good to go for a small size as we did here, and other times it is good to go for a bigger size and just make him fold all his trash. You have to estimate that on your own and depending on the type of fish that you are facing. But you should, if you don't have much experience with overbetting, you should try it in the beginning quite a lot even against fish against which you think it is better to go for a standard line, just so that you get used to the feeling of how much people are overfolding on the turn if you overbet. So let's see how he should react against the pot bet on the turn, and if he actually is playing like this. So against the pot bet, he's playing very similarly to this, I would say. He's folding these tens, but he's calling these jacks. So this is like a counter to each other. So I think overall it's GTO is playing similarly to fish against the pot bet here. Then this tens is quite similar. These kings call obviously because of the flush draw. King 3, it depends on the fish. Some of the tighter ones can fold sometimes, and the looser ones will never ever fold a hand like this. Hand like Queen 9, I think, might be folding sometimes depending on the fish. You have to assess that on your own as well. And I think that's it. They are not check raising these hands, obviously, but overall I think it looks accurate as to how GTO is playing. And the fold equity is like they are folding 53%, and they are calling the rest pretty much, and some all in. So our pot bet needs to work 50% if we have no equity. So since they are overfolding by 3%, we already know that we can take this line with a lot of trash. So if you are not comfortable playing a river delayed Sibering strategy, then you can be quite sure that barreling on the turn with pretty much any holding here will be profitable by 3%. I mean, they are overfolding 3% at least, so good to know that. And that's against the pot size bet. If you go for 110 or 125%, they start to fold every time Queen 9, and they start to fold some of the worst jacks like Jack Deuce or Jack 4. And then they always fold the 10, obviously. And they sometimes fold all the jacks if they are very weak. I know it's hard to believe, but try overbetting against weaker fish on the turn, and you will be really, really shocked of how much they are folding. Also, let's have a look at the GTO range of potting, which hands you are choosing and which hands you are preferring to check. So as you can see, like 8-5 offsuit is always a bet on the turn. These hands that don't block anything, like for example 6-5 is like a premium barrel hand on the turn because you are not blocking his floats. For example, if you have a 9 here, if you have, let's say, 9-6, you are blocking queen 9 and you are blocking, well, especially if you have an 8, let's say. So if you have an 8, you are blocking queen 8, which is a hand that is calling like an extra hand that is, no, not queen 8 because it's calling anyways. Let's say, I'm getting confused here. Anyways, like 6-5, it's a premium bluff because we don't block any of his floats on the flop. Like with 8-7, we are blocking some of his floats on the flop, and with 6-5 or 6-4, 7-4, we are not blocking anything at all. So we prefer to barrel these hands instead of something like an 8 generally, especially 8-7 because we block 8-7 itself, I guess. And you can see by the hand selection that we only barrel 8-7 if we have a spade, mostly. But then, again, your conclusion from this, that barreling exactly no equity hands at all is profitable, then you can take the conclusion that because of that 3% that they are overfolding that we saw, which in reality is maybe more like 4 or 5% sometimes. If they are overfolding by 4 or 5%, then these hands makes a lot of sense to barrel instead of checking. And I think that's all for this board. And yeah, exactly. We want to bet the hands that block 0 floats from him so that he has an easy fold from these floats on the turn. Yeah, so 6-5 doesn't block floats on the flop from him, so he has an easier folding range. I mean, a wider folding range on the turn when we have 6-5. It's hard to explain live though, so maybe I said the opposite, but your comment is correct. We want to bet the hands that block 0 floats from him. If you have no equity hand and barrel pot on this board and the river is king, do you shove? Because we can suppose he would donk jam with straight. Yeah, if the river is a king, I am shoving always. And if the river is a queen, I am shoving as well. He has so, after we bet big on the turn, he has so little straights on his range, maybe just queen 3, queen 10, and queen jack, that it's not enough combos for him to be calling with, because he also has a ton of jacks, and these jacks will be more combos than the straights that he has. So yeah, on a king river or a queen, I would be barreling. Okay, so let's have a look at the last board. Ace, king, queen. Single raise pot as well. I'll compare the Siberian strategies here. So here, as you can see, we start to bet more this sizing. The reason is, as it happened, I don't remember where, but I made a comment about this, that if our hands don't need as much protection as here we need protection from both an overcard and a gut shot, so we don't use this sizing too much. And also our opponent can afford to pay a bigger sizing. So Here, since we don't need as much protection, we start to use smaller sizings. But at the same time, we don't c-bet as much, because hands that here need protection a lot, like a jack, here if we have a king, we don't really need protection. So these hands go into a check-in range very often. So this is how it looks like, more or less. Also, the shorter we are, the more we want to be c-betting, of course, because we don't have to be so afraid of races and barrels and so on. So with 16 big blinds, we are checking only 19%, and here we are checking twice as much. And with 12 big blinds, yeah, the check is like 8%. Don't get confused by these concepts when we play deeper and when we play shorter. We have to take totally different approaches. And generally, the shorter we play, the more we want to bet medium hands, and the less afraid we are of facing check races. That's why we use a wider c-betting strategy when we are short. Okay, so let's say we bet our small size again, because we are looking to target all those gut shots. But again, as Martin said, when we min raise, our opponents don't have many jack deuce, jack 3, jack 4, jack 5 combos. So this strategy, as you will see, won't be super effective on this specific board. Okay, our opponent calls. Turn is a 3. So again, since we are not targeting gut shots very often, we are mostly only targeting pairs. We want to go very polarized, and we don't have like medium-ish sizes, and we either use a pot bet or a check. Also, we use hands with equity mostly. We don't like to use as many hands with no equity as previously, because as we said, we don't have as much fold equity as previously. Here we had much more fold equity on the turn. Here we don't have as many, and you can see that by the amount of pure bluffs that we put into our turn barreling range. So before we were putting 6-5 100% of the time, 8-5 100%, 9-5 100%, 6-4 100%, and now we are much more careful about our frequencies. So we bet pot, and our opponent is folding 52%, which is 2% extra that we are making, and he's calling the rest. He never has an all-in range. But what we can take from here is that depending on the fish, we have to estimate whether he will be folding queens or not. If he's folding all of his queens, then obviously we want to increase our turn barreling range, and we can start to include more hands like 6-5 or so. But you have to be careful in selecting your opponent, because some people, some fish don't fold here as much. I think like 65% of fish would fold all of their queens here, and 35% will be stubborn and not fold queens. Maybe less, maybe like 25% of fish will be stubborn and won't fold queens. And then that's about it on this turn, I guess. Just be aware of your opponent and try to estimate whether he will be folding all of his queens or not. And if he is, then just start to barrel some more hands like these ones. But be very careful with the overbet sizings here, as I said, because if we bet, for example, 125%, which would be 750 instead of 600, he will be folding all queens, but he won't be folding many kings here, I would say. So if you use an overbet here, you aren't accomplishing much. You aren't gaining a lot of fold equity, and your opponent will call a very similar range as when you don't overbet. So be careful with overbets on this specific spot. And I think that's all. We give up on blank rivers. It depends on the fish again. Um, if you think he's the type of fish he can hero call with a king, then give up, of course. If he's the type of fish that you never expect him to hero call with a king, then go for it. And you can estimate that based on his based on him being passive or aggressive pre-flop mostly. Generally, people who are aggressive pre-flop tend to hero call quite a lot more, and people who are very passive tend to overfold a lot. So for example, if the player is only playing 50% VPIP on the small blind, if he isn't limp betting much, if he plays kind of afraid, then you really want to take advantage of this player. And then if he's playing the opposite, you don't want to bluff him. You want to bet big on the turn, and that's all. And maybe not even bet big on the turn, because if you are playing a super stubborn guy, he won't be folding these hands. And if he isn't folding these hands, if you are betting 6-5 offsuit, then it's a complete punt, obviously. And I think that's all for today. If you have doubts or any questions, let me know. Do you take into account previous hands to try to make a fish fold the second pair? Yes, of course. I take into account every single piece of information that I have, and I try to put it together. I mean, if you played really aggressive 4 hands in a row or something, definitely. If you have played very aggressive previously, then they don't like to fold, because they don't like to feel like weak pussies, you know? So their ego comes in the way, and when you don't want to mess up with poker players' egos generally, especially when you play live, it's super bad. Just give up if you are facing a player that you think that he's feeling like he's being exploited. Nobody in the world wants to feel like he's being run over, so in order to stop that feeling of being run over, they start calling more, not only because they think that calling is CB plus, because they also want to end that feeling. So if someone is feeling super owned in a spin and go, and you are playing super aggressive against him, he might just call because he wants to end his emotions. You know, he wants to escape from you crushing him. It's like a boxing match. If you are boxing against my weather, you want to maybe open your face and say, okay, give me a KO because I want to go out of here, and this is the only way to go out. Just give me a KO and I will let you do it. So that's how fish actually think sometimes. They just want to, they are prepared to lose, and they want to end their bad emotions right after it. So sometimes we think they should sit out. It's easier, yeah. But it's like, yeah, I don't know. No one wants to sit out in a boxing fight either. It's so bad. But instead of saying openly that you want to get beaten. You just let yourself get beaten somehow. It's like very subconscious. I don't think fish are even aware of it. But I think that we as professionals take into account logic way, way too hard, and sometimes psychology and how the fish is feeling is super, super important. But it's hard to do when you play a lot of tables, of course. When I play not many tables, I think I have a much sicker win rate because I try to pay attention to all those details if I can. Okay, nice. So if you have any questions about the session, because I think it's a bit deep, and also our strategies will change depending on the board and so on, and our sizings as well. Because Martin's recently asked me a few times about my overbetting strategies, and it's really hard to put my thoughts together and give you rules of thumb. Because as you could see here, depending on the board, you want to use a sizing or another. So I hope this clarified you a little bit more everything. And if you rewatch this session and have any doubts on any board or suggestions, let me know in the chat. So see you guys, and thanks for coming.